Welcome back to the Dungeon Master Academy. I'm Dungeon Master Jeff. Here on the DMA, I interview third-party D&D writers. We talk about the writing process, their creations, and how to best run it at your own gaming table. Okay, so this episode is featured adventures Lone Survivor. It's episode 2 in the 80 Astra series, written by Daniel Chapman and Lex Winter, and it's edited by Brian Metz, and the artist is Douglas Bushong. It's a 4-hour AL Dungeons & Dragons adventure for Tier 1 characters, APL'd at level 3. There is a content warning, watch out, of abduction, auditory hallucinations, and a body horror transformation. It has a sci-fi horror feel to it, for sure. We will be talking about spoilers, so you have been warned. Today I have with me one of the co-writers, Daniel Chapman. Daniel is a veteran D&D author with over 10 credits on the DM's Guild, with multiple bestsellers, I might add. All the way from Michigan, USA, whoop whoop, I'm happy to introduce Daniel E. Chapman. Hi Daniel, why don't you give us some character backstory on yourself?
Sure. So, middle-aged dude, like a lot of the folks in our hobby, but married, I have my daughter's grown, house, dog, all that standard things, with a peculiar hobby. We were actually kind of talking about that a moment ago. It's like your geek flag. So, my professional life, I'm a software architect. So, the peculiar hobby comes up every now and then where you're like, what is it you do on Wednesdays? Yeah, okay. Used to be afraid to show that, but yeah, obviously not so much now. But
No, now it's definitely waving the flag of Geekville, right?
oh yeah. Well, it's funny because a lot of the Polish coworkers are asking about it, so it's got the attention of a few people that haven't heard about it. But yeah, people have asked about the adventures and stuff too. So
That's awesome when all of a sudden it's you're becoming cool mainstream and people are very interested in what you're doing. That's awesome.
yeah. And then you run into people that are from work at the cons and such. It's like, okay, there's some crossover here. Computers and gaming, not exactly a the Venn diagram does connect. But let's see here. I've been playing since about 83. I'm not sure about exactly when, but right around the time the Red Box came out, that was the first thing I got it. Saw the commercials about it, got excited about it. But I actually started with, prior to the Red Box, with the old one, the Moldvay, I think it was, that had the random encounter chart that had the robots in it, and that was just the funniest thing in my young brain was you get to fight a robot with a sword. That has got to be the coolest thing ever. So yeah, the random encounter chart in that one was weird. So
Yeah, I gotta look that up. We'll show that to the viewers because I gotta do some digging to find that one. I don't know if a PDF of that thing exists.
Oh yeah, you can get it off of DM's Guild too. So but let's see here. I took a short break from D&D, played like Vampire, Shadowrun, all that sort of thing. Did a ton of White Wolf in college because, of course, I was in my goth era. But got back to the simple hit it with my sword type of play, which D&D has in AL specifically has got me now because it is really easy to get into, to play, pick up, and you can have a schedule with AL. You can only play once a week, or you can play every other week, whatever. You get your progress and you keep it. So that's strength of AL style D&D play. So
yeah, I totally agree with you. That's I took a long break from D&D and started playing in a home group, and then discovered AL, and that was perfect for me as well, where I could just drop in with the character and start playing, knowing basically what the rules were, but not having the time or like a weekly campaign or something like that. It definitely got me interested and invigorated within D&D.
You can hear my background as an old LC, old AL coordinator that used to have to pitch it to the stores. So, but it's like if you want to play only once in a while, or you want to play all the time, because you can keep your progress either way. So that pitch is drilled in my brain.
It's a very true pitch too at the same time. Very true. So you wrote this adventure, Lone Survivor, with a co-writer, right? With Lex Winter. Knowing that this was a chapter in your overall storyline, how did you break up the responsibilities with your co-author, with writing style at least?
So this was a bit of a struggle for us because we both we both had our directions. So we started out with brainstorming and kept like an outline that we wanted to work with, like, so we can try and split it up, because like both of us didn't want to step on the other one. So it wasn't like a challenge because we both had these ideas we want to go. It's just like okay, how are we going to split it up? But it turned out like we had like the same ideas for things, and so it ended up being like this build on each other sort of thing. It was actually a really cool brainstorming session. So we had this long calls. We chatted about the NPCs. Like a lot of the NPCs were Lex's ideas that I then tweaked. Originally, the NPCs were much meaner to each other, so you'll see a little bit of that with like Troy, where he gets, you know, Elroy/Troy. Like they didn't bother to learn his name because he's just another replacement for another guy that died in a previous mission. We don't care about him. And Gorlian was much more of a jerk. I kind of niced him out because I wanted to have that sacrificial thing, but you know, like the NPCs are a little more mean, and so they got nicer after a while. But we did the NPC breakup. We split up the different scenes. So like Lex did the water tank scene, and I did the science vessel. But we talked about how we'd have the split up and then the rejoin. So like the piece with the shriekers from the invasion of the body snatchers, that scene was like where we assumed everyone would come in. Changed a little bit obviously in the final adventure where like there's 3 entry points, but you know, we had this like split up, people disappear, and then there was a lot more about like we tried to figure out how we'd have the the indication that something's happening elsewhere on the planet. So we were talking about how to do all that. But the deadline started to come fast. You know, like we had a lot of ideas, but no writing. And so that's where I like got heads down and started writing stuff down. And Lex ended up having some schedule issues near the end. So I kind of took it over from him, and I felt a little self-conscious. Like I was just like, I don't know if this was his plan, but we're going that way.
Yeah.
So, and Brian stepped in, and Brian might as well have been a co. And I kind of pushed for him to actually have co-writing credit because he did a ton. Jason did a fair bit too. So, like you mentioned, there's a lot of the NPCs, a lot of details about them. Like we had some capsule descriptions of NPCs and ideas about them, but like the captain was barely fleshed out, and Jason like wrote this whole story about it. And it's like, oh, because I have plans for her. So, and like the whole thing on Hobbs End, that was Jason. So you know, we ended up with a lot of text where like different people stepped in, and it and you know, Brian also then took Jason's stuff and edited it down too. So it was a long process with a lot of folks, but it turned out, I think, pretty well.
I totally agree. Having so many people involved, you can't tell different writing styles through the adventure. It flows very nicely all the way through. So commend to everybody on the team for doing that. It really, when I was reading it, I wasn't able to tell, oh, that's your section, that's his section, that's your section, like in writing style difference. So that was really good. At the same time, congratulations. So
Cool.
let's get right into the adventure at the same time. Where can I find it, and what comes with the package?
So it is a 50-page adventure PDF file that comes in the standard Dungeon Craft format. So if you've run other AL adventures, especially if you've done other Dungeon adventures, you'll recognize that format. There's maps and some art that come in a separate zip file. The art is all both black and white color art done by Doug Bushong. So that's really good for your tokens. I've definitely used all of them for my tokens. It much better than the placeholder art that we wouldn't have been able to include, which were all the science fiction that it was drawn inspiration from. The maps are also separate in that separate download that was done by Cinderella Cartography. And so it's all very easy to throw into VTT. So like the whole Ad Astra series, whenever I have to run any of them for my weekly online games, it's one of the faster ones to prep. So
Yeah, I noticed that too when I was putting together rock paper scissors and this adventure for in Roll20. It went really quick. You didn't have to outsource a lot of other stuff, where sometimes in other adventures you have to. So it made it really easy to buy the adventure, put it together, and be able to run the game. That's for sure.
Yep.
So let's get into it here. So I finished rock paper scissors and ran it. So I have a couple questions about the transition between rock paper pistols and Lone Survivor. Okay, so at the end of rock paper pistols, they find a bauble, right? Which is great. And that's the engine basically that does the train that they find later on. Spoilers. And they also find an ancient star chart.
Yeah.
I didn't see any mention of the ancient star chart in part 2. Did I miss something, or is that something that comes up later on?
I have not seen it yet. I'm betting it comes up later. But I honestly, I think that could have been a really good opportunity because like this system is lost. So an ancient star chart that would tell you about it would be great, but no, it didn't. Um, so you'll have to keep an eye out for that. But there is a lot of things that I have noticed that for. Like I just ran the recent one, which was 8, and
Mhm.
it mentioned some details about like one of the aspects of the monad, and I'm like, when did they tell you that? Shoot, I forgot. We go back and read 7 again. So you'll see that through the series.
Yeah, I am running it with the same group, so I'm looking for questions that they're gonna ask of like, hey, that's great, we got the bauble, we know what that does, we got a star chart. What's this about? And instead of me just going, I figured I'd ask a question. Um,
Oh yeah. And some of this is meant to be like you'll find out later. Like you are investigating the mystery of this civilization or whatever it is that made this like ancient artifact that nobody knows anything about. So like who made it? What is it about? What can it do? That's the whole point of the series is to find that out. Like you're there with the Clamp Combine as they research. So
yeah, I thought that was it's gonna be later on. That I know that's gonna be my answer for sure. I do love it though. And I also love salvage mission adventures. They're a lot of fun
Mhm.
to play. I think it's really good exploring. You never know what's around any corner and what you can kind of run into. Typically, do you do tons of exploring and what kind of vibe does the adventure have?
So the exploration, I don't do the exploration aspect I like to have. I do less like the salvage mission things, but so the capsule description of this really was the horror was the theme I was given. So each of us got a different theme. So like you'll see the next adventure is the beach adventure because apparently every anime has a beach adventure. I didn't know that, but now I do. But the horror aspects of what I wanted. So, space and horror is, very like we have a lot of movies about that. So I definitely got to dive into that. But we didn't try and get more of the exploration element in that because that plays up in the horror. Like you're going through this silent, uh, abandoned place and you see remnants of people that did not fare well. So that helps play up both the horror and the exploration pillar. Um, so it definitely comes across by playing to that, and the rest of the isolation plays up too, because like it's this cramped station where like your enemies know that you don't know as you're going through, and you didn't even know they were there until things happen. Um, and so yeah, it's that was definitely I did play it up for this one. I've done other horror adventures, but not really like exploration. So we've done a lot more of the eldritch horror. So this was a new for me to do the survival horror. But I got to have
Yeah, survival horror. That's
yeah
definitely the vibe I get from this too. I love sci-fi movies and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of this really speaks to me in a lot of creepy ways of how to run something, but not too creepy that you're going to scare people and they're not going to want to play with you anymore for sure. Um,
yeah
I think there's a when the bad guy dies at the end of this adventure, which is awesome, a worm crawls out of it, and I don't know how creepy that is. But then the best part about that worm, instead of you expecting it to be like aliens or something like that, it's actually the magic item, which I thought was pretty brilliant of the way that you wrote that in. So it's actually, spoiler alert, it's an Eldritch Claw tattoo, which is very clever.
and
Definitely when
and
I run this
it's
game. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, and it's the creepiness doesn't stop. Like you keep the item, but what it actually does ends up being creepy too.
Yeah, I
So
know. I think when I run this game, I'm definitely going to finish it off with the box text at the end, and then add as you fall asleep on your journey home. I'm going to pick an NPC, and that worm has infected them, like Alien style at the end of the movie, kind of thing. Definitely one of my favorite magic items in all of AL, and I'm going to pronounce this really badly, is Krizen's Ooze.
okay,
It's like a symbioid that you can. One of my PCs drank it. It's a symbioid magic item that you drink it and you become part ooze, where you get oh, it's super cool. Like I got really excited when I had it, and it kind of reminiscent of that, of actually having a symbioid living within inside you, kind of
yeah.
not sentient at the same time. But I thought that was a really cool aspect of it. So I love your magic items in this, of like how creepy that gets.
Yeah, I love the fact that I've had players that have traded it away for like the vanilla version of it.
Yeah, they're just like, this could be a little too much. Yeah, I could see it like when you see the worm kind of in your arm, and that's the way I'm gonna play it. Of like underneath
Yeah.
the skin, you see this kind of going on and infecting your arm that kind of goes up into your chest, into your body. End scene, right? Like, oh my god, that'll be a great way to finish it. Okay, so obviously this show is about how to give advice on the best way to run with the adventure. In that in mind, I have a couple of questions that I'm gonna
Sure.
need some advice on how to handle this.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, lots going on in the call of action, but only 30 minutes to get through it, right? You have a call to action, you're introducing NPCs, you got the adventure backstory, and actually, you have about 7 or 8 NPCs right off the top. How can you fit all that in a half an hour without feeling rushed?
So I think the best idea is to not try to fit it all in. Like, don't try and get
Okay.
every aspect of it. So it introduces a bunch of NPCs and location and mission and so on. But like, you're trying to get the idea of these NPCs being people. So the first thing we did, like, we did try and break up the pieces. So you introduce a few NPCs at a time, and then others show up, and then others show up.
Okay.
But if you're comfortable with like a bit of ad living, you can certainly let them like drive that one. So if you want to have like some NPCs get a little more attention because they're interested in that NPC, then let them do it. Or if they want to like leave Hobbs End, or not leave Hobbs End, but leave like the and walk around, whatever, you can come up with it. But the goal is to not like follow that slavishly. Just you want them to get to know these guys that are now going to be in danger. So
Okay.
that's the main goal. As long as you fit that goal, it doesn't matter. um, Now, when you get that, you know, the handout that you get later that introduces the NPCs, like if you're going to pick that you're going to have them go on certain missions, because you can certainly nudge them if you want to prep. Like, I want them to do the science vessel. I don't want them to do the munitions factory. Then you know you can spend an extra time on that one and know like, oh, you know, the science factory is Yaz, so I'm going to focus on Yaz. You know, you can certainly do that. Um, or you can leave some of the introduction to when they're on those escort missions rather than have it be a whole bunch at once.
I
So
love that idea because I can't run that many NPCs at the same time. I'm just not that
yeah.
good at the same, and very few and far between DMs can actually pull that off. I love the idea of maybe introducing 1 or 2 right off the top so they can understand that there's
Yeah.
more than just them on the ship, and then
Mhm.
really kind of because I see the point punching home is for the characters to care about the NPCs because spoiler alert, they all get snatched, right?
Mhm.
So for the adventure, you have to have a little bit of the emotional investment of the PCs to the NPCs, or why are they ever going to care about them? And I think
Right.
getting to know them a little bit on that on the mission that they have to go with the individual NPCs will definitely alleviate a lot of that right off the top.
That's part of the reason we have them too, is to like you actually like interact with them rather than just have a bunch of people introduced, because there's no who do you care that about the captain if you weren't like actually, you know, talking to the captain, and the captain's like, you know, oh my god, we need to go rescue so and so. It's like suddenly that matters, where you just, the captain talks to you, you don't care.
Yeah.
um Same thing for like each other NPC. So um the other trick, by the way, I did
Mm-hmm.
forget to mention, it isn't so much important to have them interact with the PCs. Like, just you can describe kind of one off, like if you don't want to have a whole lot of details about the scientists in this one, you can have them describe that they're arguing and have them like go off of the scene, so it just, there's the motion of them doing things. So you can just, I don't know, it's trying to make them seem like they have this cohesive, not a cohesive, but this real life work environment, and that, you know, you're coming into, so that they look like people. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's really good because realistically in the world when you go to a new like job or anything like that, there's going to be say 20 people, 15, 5 people.
Yeah.
You're not going to have individual conversations with those 5 people as soon as like in day one of your job. Realistically, you might have 1 or 2, and then as things progress along, oh, you're working on a project with so and so in this group of people, then you get to know them. So that really makes sense, and I really think that the player handout that you had
Mhm.
and just kind of like a DM guide almost of, hey, you start here and these are your options. Pick a couple of them that you're going to do to move on. I think that'll really, really help with the timing for sure.
Mhm.
That's a great adventure. I love it. It's super fun, especially snatching players and snatching NPCs out of the air. That's awesome. And role playing NPCs are super fun because everybody loves doing that in adventures. With so many NPCs, who would be your, not so many, but a lot of
Mhm.
NPCs, who would be your favorite PC or NPC to RP? That means role play.
I liked Myth. Myth was he's kind of done with this all. So the entire time he's just like, come on, just give me room. Like you don't interact with Myth. He's off doing the mission on his own, and he's the expert, and he's kind of annoyed with all the arguing that happens around him by the other members of the crew. So he's just like, I'm here to do a job. Let me finish. And then in the end, like when he dies, he like, is starting to give you the lessons about like that one bit of sacrificial, like this robotic robot suddenly has this moment of like, sacrifice and emotion at the end. I liked that. I do like Troy a bit because Troy is just the other issue of the guy that gets no respect. I was totally expecting him to die. Jason had other plans for him, so you'll see him later. But
Oh.
he survived surprisingly.
So don't
um,
kill the NPCs off. Okay, copy that.
oh no, you can kill him off because there's always the decoy thing. It's like you end up in the last room, and so Troy died. It's like no, that wasn't really Troy. He was in here. So there are ways to answer. So um, we had so much fun with that decoy concept too, because we've had the players where they're like trying to convince the decoy to prove that they're not a decoy, and they think that that's going to win, and it's like no, the decoy is convinced they're not a decoy. They're going to demonstrate it, and then they find out they're a decoy. It's like that
There's a
throws everyone
lot of
off.
good stuff in this that a DM has to track that the players will never realize until it kind of comes out to them. What we're
Yeah.
kind of speaking about with decoys, and this will be a
Oh, sorry.
spoiler. No, it's all good. No. Like this is the show's for DMs, so they understand how to better run it. If we don't tell them how to
Mm,
run it, they'll just kind of like make it up as they go along. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But so during the parts 1 and 2 of the adventure, actually, we'll get into this in a second because before we get into
yeah.
the final battle and the bad guy, which is awesome and dynamic, and wow, that's going to be super fun to run because there's lots going on. I'd like to talk about part 1 because you break one of my cardinal rules
Oh,
of DMing, and I got to bring this up because that's not fair to anybody if I don't.
yeah.
Breaking up the party. Part
Oh my
1,
gosh.
breaking up the party. I understand that the vibe is isolation, space horror isolation. In a scenario where you're splitting up the party and each individual party member will take like say 5-10 minutes to play that section of the adventure only with one player, that means some players could be waiting up to half an hour to have a turn. How can you keep the players involved that don't have a turn and not getting bored?
Well, in this case, we did more of that than we ended up with. So like the party is going with the individual NPCs. They're not splitting individually up. We did have that in the original draft, but the
Okay.
problem you described nixed it because it's not even that the splitting up the party is like 5 minutes of this guy and 30 minutes for the guy that's 5 minutes of fun, 30 minutes of waiting.
Yeah.
That is a problem, but it actually means that the time is expanded for not as much story. So we ended up undoing that. It was a goal. It was a definite goal, but this is the Brian talked to me out of it. But we ended up with that concept by making the NPCs a little more interesting, and then we ended up having it be that the conversation over the arcancelable array, basically the communicator, um, in the static that makes it so that you have the feeling that you're connected, and then we take it away from you.
Yeah.
So you hear the reporting to know that stuff is happening while you're doing yours, but you don't have that comfort of being able to report back. So it definitely gets that the concept of isolation by not allowing them to freely talk. It also explains things later.
Yeah.
But
No, that totally makes sense now. Okay, yeah, because like that's I've never seen it done successfully, splitting up the party
yeah,
ever,
I,
ever.
I've had a couple of times where you can do it in a small degree, but in almost every case, you end up either hand waving it and having the players, or I don't know. I've not found a way that I've been comfortable doing it consistently, and I wanted to give it a try. So I might try it again sometime.
Yeah,
But
please, please do,
yeah,
because it's one of those kind of like Sphinx puzzles that no one
yeah,
has ever been able to figure out, right? It's, it really kind of comes down to D&D being a group game, inclusive game where you want everyone to be playing at the same time and everyone to be interacting, right? And
yeah.
I've
But
never
you,
seen it done. That's why.
yeah. Well, you want to. I'm sure that this could have worked if we would have spent more time, but it would have been probably longer than the adventure could call for. Because, like, you want to have that ability to have the party together without necessarily being geographic near each other. So, like,
Mhm.
they could be in different areas and communicate without necessarily being in the exact same room in the game. I think it can be done. But you also see that I recognize it as a problem because, like, the chapter
Yeah.
headings are all named after bad ideas as an adventure, and splitting the party is one of the chapter headers.
I
So
didn't notice that. That's a really good Easter egg at the same time. The only way I could see it working, and this is just like off the top of my head right now, is if you split everybody up and then you did initiative count, right? Where
yeah,
it's like, what do you want to do for, you get one action, you get one action, you get one action, and then kind of do round
right.
table that way. That would limit the amount of individual time at the same time, and it might do that. So there's a little idea for you. I won't copyright it. You can use it in your next adventure, and then we can
Let's
discuss it and replay this video from like a year ago when you actually produce it. So that'll be awesome. I'm like, hey, full circle, look at us go.
well,
That's awesome.
we did that with Marionette. Marionette does that, but you end up with the problem where, like, one finishes early. So, like, okay, can I go join them? Yeah, okay. So I don't know. We'll
Oh,
figure it out.
look at
Yeah.
you and all your adventures. Like, oh my God, that's great. Uh, I love this, and following up on that topic at the same time. I feel like the main theme in part one is having some of the NPCs kidnapped, right? Like that's the goal, is to have them kidnapped and kind of give a little bit of love to them at the same time. Can you give me a little bit of more backstory on what happened on the asteroid prior to the party arriving?
Sure. So this is kind of where we have the villain's big speech at the end. So it started off with the civilization has discovered the arcansible flower, which was part of the monad. So, like, the monad backstory comes into it. Like, they have the train that has all this miraculous technology that civilization had experimented to come up with. And as the series goes on, you'll find more about that. But the flower was just a flower. They had learned that it helped them communicate over long distances. And another civilization that, once again, lost civilization, has discovered this flower and was doing research on it, and used it to experiment on other flowers, and cross and plant and breed, figure out how to make things like that. And in the process, they ended up with the villain, who we don't explain how the asteroid everyone died, but the villain ended up frustrated because he had this revenge fantasy going on, and now he's finally free, and they're already dead. So you come into play with him looking to vent his frustrations on other humanoids. So
Wrong place, wrong time.
yeah, this guy's been sitting there stewing for ages, and oh,
Oh my God, it reminds me of anybody in a relationship when you get home from work or you get home from doing something and your partner isn't happy with you and they've been waiting for you to come home to put you on blast. So I
yeah.
think I'm definitely gonna do that with the bad guy, of just like whine and complain and whine and bitch and whine and whine and whine. That'll be really hilarious too at the same time. That's great. I love this adventure. I definitely think it helps me kind of become very creative within the personalities of the bad guys, the NPCs, the whole theme of it, talking to the writer to get where they're coming from. And then I'm like, oh, and then that'll spark something in my convoluted brain of like, oh, now I know exactly how I'm playing this person. And then I can become them. So it makes it a lot easier for me. But I feel like things in the adventure really start ramping up in part three.
Mhm.
With revealing of the wood curse, right? On one of the captured NPCs, and he ends up getting a wood curse, which I thought was awesome and super creepy. I love it. By chance, were you watching Game of Thrones when you wrote that, Grayscale?
Nope. I actually haven't read it or watched it at all. I was trying to so like all the different classic horror movies. The Thing had this whole scene that I wanted to bring in where they're trying to see who it is that has been taken over by the plant creature, and so like they're testing the blood, and it's a surprise to everybody. And so I want to have something like that where there's the reveal where it's like, oh yeah, I've got this plant growing in me, and you need to leave me behind. I wanted to have that. This is another aspect because you have the different reactions to the horror aspect of it from the different NPCs. So I wanted to have that sacrificial, heroic, strong, dude that no, I'm not going to be the downfall of us all. So, um, so that was the goal there. There's the plant creature that takes over the host that the guy just says, nope, can't trust me anymore.
I thought that was absolutely awesome. I think that's a really good emotional point in the
Mhm.
adventure as well. I love those kind of things where all of a sudden you kind of throw the players a curveball that they weren't expecting, and not in a physical dominating way of something, in more of the pull the sympathy
Mhm.
card, because everyone's all in D&D, everyone's always geared up for action, right? Like
Yeah.
they're geared up for combat, killing things, kind of a little bit of RP, some play, but it's few and far between that you see like the heartstring being pulled. And I think this is a
Mhm.
really good opportunity to kind of get the table to cry. I love getting people to cry at my table. But like I really see this like making it like an emotional point where they've been invested in this character, keeping him alive, and then he sacrifices himself, just saying, "Hey, like I'm gonna die, and you can't trust me anymore. That you need to leave
Mhm.
me behind." And seeing how the players react to leaving him behind, or will they even try to kill him? Like
Oh man, yeah.
right? Like there's so many
Exactly.
really good choices for players to make in there of like what do they want to do and how do they want to handle this situation of like one of their comrades basically not being able to survive, right?
Mhm.
I thought
And,
that was good.
and
Is he the lone
and as
survivor?
no, the lone survivor would be the bad guy. But yeah, the although I like making it ambiguous. But no, the when they actually if they survive, if they cure him, it's almost always a great opportunity to have him pick up a spear and fight alongside them because the players will be like cheering for Gorlian's crits. I have not had a time where I have not had him run where they're not like, cheering for his actions in combat. So that is a
Oh,
fun thing to do. Yeah.
okay. So maybe I will get him to live. That's good. I'm curious to see how this all plays out, right? Because I
Yeah.
treat my DM style like choose your own adventures. Like I'll
Yeah.
give the scenario and kind of like, hey, what do you want to do now? Turn to page, turn to page, turn to page. And I think that
Yeah.
this really fits into my style of play that I think I'm half decent at the same time. Just ramping up that moment to what do you want to do now? You have somebody that's sacrificing
Mhm.
themselves that eventually will turn into a monster unless you cure him. Um,
Yep.
Wow, that's good. It's like one of my favorite lines of like, do you want to die as the villain or live as the hero? No, die as the hero and live
Yeah.
with live as a villain. Like, oh my God,
Yeah.
what a line. Like that, and that goes right into that line. I think I might actually bring that out of like that'll be one of those mic drop moments of like, what do you want to do? And then, hey, we're gonna take a break for 15 minutes and I'll see you in a little bit. Uh, just to screw them up. That's great. And then we go into part 4, which is even more awesome, and has some of my favorite D&D elements. It really does. Uh, Players have to fight horrific imposters of themselves just before they even get into the big bad guy area, which is great. DM should take notes during the adventure, during player introduction specifically, so they can really lean into this. Like any sort of clothing that they're wearing, any mannerisms that they have, or a stupid smile on the face. DM really has to lean into that because that could become super creepy, them fighting themselves. And then you have box text, which I love, for the villain's montage, for the villain's monologue. Sorry, I love RPing the villain right before the final battle. Right, I love that. It's super fun. I've noticed that you've given the big bad guy botany effects, which are basically layer actions at the same time. Um, how many times have you seen TPKs for a third level party trying to go into this battle?
I haven't had TPK. I've had close. It's the way that we've broken it out. There is definitely better decisions than others. Like, they have a lot of very slow moving or not immobile enemies throughout. So the guys that move very fast are not as much a threat. The big bad guy up there, big threat. So if they ignore him entirely and focus on all the little stuff, yeah, you get a TPK. But we've had other parties that just rush through to the bad guy. It's like, okay, I didn't expect you to be able to get up there, but sure, that's the way it works. So I've never had anyone waste all of their time down below and not focus on the big guy, because the layer effects help, uh, I guess, emphasize that he is the bad guy, or it is the bad guy. It isn't it. Um, I don't know. It definitely could be a TVK,
It's
but
just so like I could see the players getting overwhelmed, right? I
mhm,
think one of your botany actions is they can spawn another replica, right? And I
yep,
think they can do this up to 6 times,
yep,
right? Or they skip, I have to skip around to do it or something along those lines. But you could add another 6 kind of bodies to this fight as like meat puppets for them, just to kind of
yeah.
waste their time as they keep going through it. It's going to be a bit of a slog, but I think this is
And
going to be a
and
really good one.
and the three-dimensional aspect is just as much a challenge, if not as a layer effect, because this guy is up on a pillar. So the climbing is something that you can do with no, magic, and just you climb, so but they don't tend to think of that. So just throwing that little tiny wrinkle in there sometimes makes an extra challenge. So I wanted to have that, because you'll see it in your tier 2 adventures more and more, that the third dimension suddenly plays. But this one definitely is part of it. We wanted to give something where they just didn't rush in right away. Um,
Yeah. And
so
not a lot of like barely any PCs at third level have any flight options either, right?
right,
So there might be one or two out of your party, maybe, that has a little bit of flight for that final battle. But
right,
typically they're like a melee, like not a melee character that needs to get up and close, like to do some major damage to it. So I could see this. It's going to be a challenge. We'll say that for
right,
players to kind of navigate through, and that's a good thing, right?
yeah.
I think they're going to be a little overwhelmed when they first kind of walk into the room and go, "Oh my, like, how are we going to possibly do this?" kind of thing. And then slow playing it, giving them time because I think when anybody enters the room for the final battle, I think it always gives having that parlay with the bad guy gives players time to formulate a plan on how to attack and how they want to go about this at the same time, and not just rolling initiative. It
Right,
gives the players a chance to kind of like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? While we find out the story of how he wants to kill everybody at the same time.
yep.
Well played, well played. Thanks for all that info. Obviously, love it. Now that I'm sorted out,
Mhm.
what advice could you give to DMs to run this adventure?
So this is like the style of DMing I do, but I like encourage it for anything I write, is to take control of the adventure. Like I've written some suggestions. It's always the struggle to go from a DM to an author. Is like, I know how I'd run this. If I had a bunch of notes, I know exactly how to run it. So I'm trying to describe how to run something like I would, but like you're still running your table. So like this is my opinion. You think your players will enjoy something different, then do that. AL is very just within AL, it's very permissive as far as your ability to change things. So if you want to push them towards an escort mission, you do that. If you want to focus more on the role play and have that go on, certainly do that as well. If they're enjoying the spooky bits, then go ahead and, there are so many more opportunities to have more isolation and stuff, atmospheric things happening. I tried to put some in there, but like, there is very little of the intro parts that need to happen if you want to
Hmm.
spend more time in exposition and it works for you. um so like I almost felt like I should give you a bulleted list of spooky things. um it's like you're trying to capture that feel, so you know what's working when you look at your players' faces.
Oh, okay.
um
So, yeah, that's a good point. So, when
yeah.
I prep, I like
uh,
to make bullet points of critical
mm.
story elements. What would you say the critical story elements are? Like you just kind of spoke that you don't have to spend as much time with the NPCs right in part one. So, what are the critical story elements that the DMs need to hit so it makes sense, especially for keeping continuity for later 80 Astra series?
Yeah, you need to have some element of the replacement or the threat to the NPCs come into play so that you get the right theme. So like that is an important aspect to capture the theme is there is danger to these NPCs because the players, they have an AC and a lot of hit points. The NPCs have plot saving them. I'm not going to save them. So, have them have stuff happen to them. Um, the scene that has the false villain or the false end guy, which I didn't intentionally write it that way, but it's worked out that way, and I enjoyed the fact it worked out that way. That feels like it's important, but I don't really think it is because like you could have the end villain tell it. So you can drop that entire encounter with the wood curse in that room. You can have the wood curse there if you want and make it a faster encounter. But like, drop that scene or drop the scenes that have the entry points. You just as long as you capture that, there is danger throughout here and that, the villains are gonna the heroes, the NPCs are going to face danger.
Okay. Yeah, there's
Um
lots of good stuff in this adventure to do.
yeah. But there are definitely cases where I have run through it, and because I'm familiar with it, I have forgotten to read things when they happened. There is definitely a mix it and put it somewhere else ability in this adventure too. So I'm infamous for messing up my own adventures. I do it all the time. So
Oh, I didn't tell you that part. Oh, sorry. I do that
yeah,
all the time. It's nice to read adventures that you can literally, I wouldn't call them cookie cutter, but you can
yeah,
take information from one area and put it into another, and it doesn't affect the storyline, but just
yep.
and keeps the storyline, right? Like,
Mhm.
I do that all the time. Don't feel bad.
So
Well, absolutely amazing. You must have play tested this multiple times. You kind of spoke about how you've run the adventure. Um, what roadblocks did you find when you were playtesting it yourself, like from the author point of view?
oh, that first part. Oh my gosh, that was the huge like getting that right. We had different the escort missions. We had different versions of it each time. Um, and I had problems with getting the players to come back to the ship and join up with everybody. And
Oh,
it's like, yeah. So the first thing they hear is they hear that the myth got grabbed. They're like, why are we going back to the ship and then coming here? We're already there. We'll just go down and try and rescue him. And trying to come up with a plot to get the I'd like you to fit the rails a little. It's like everyone says railroads are like this horrible, horrible thing, but like, it's challenging for a DM to come up with every permutation of how the story could go. And so that's what we end up reworking more than anything else. Like the combats did not change a whole lot. But we're trying to like make sure the paths are about the same, that they had predictable, like, the players will probably do this.
mhm.
Um, and the getting the time down was difficult too.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like yeah, like the weightless movement to collect the leeches off of, or the barnacles or whatever they are, the jammer leeches off of the old ship.
Hmm.
That took a long time. It was fun. Everyone thought it was really cool because it was like, attached by ropes and floating away. And it's like, it's like bouncing house, and it was
Yeah,
fun, but not enough to like, count as time of the adventure. So yeah.
it's always
Oh,
it's,
and
it's always tough.
yeah, 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 that definitely. And then the other one was the maps. Like my maps were I I am not a great map maker, so Cinderella had to come back and do my maps. But like trying to come up with the right maps for the different scenes, like 3-dimensional or crawling through pipes, or no idea how to do maps or any of that stuff. So the playtest maps were pretty rough. So
Well, and that's why they're play tests, right? To
yeah.
figure out where all the roadblocks are and what. I know what you mean, where it's really tough building an open world system for players to go in and prepping it because you never know where they're going to end up and how they're
Mhm.
going to end up doing things. I even referenced when I was doing Rock Paper Pistols, the first one in the 88 Astra. Players were all over the map where I needed them basically to meet Eliza in the bazaar at that point. So I literally they wanted to go somewhere, and I'm like, oh, and you're walking through the bazaar, bam, and now you're here.
And they didn't even notice it either. Yeah.
No, and it was just like, oh, they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. Da, 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 da. So it's definitely tough to run an open world versus a railroad linear. But sometimes you need a linear to tell the storyline, right? At the same time, in conjunction with what's going on, and not just like paragraph. Here's a big info dump on all the players, and this is why, and they're supposed to just understand it versus discovering it on their own at the same time.
I want to say that is a very obvious and yet brilliant move, by the way, is just to say, like, I want to get them to the bazaar. So you're walking through the bazaar. I don't know why that's never occurred to me, but that is amazing. So I will use that.
I do that a lot where it's, obviously there's key story points or key NPCs during an adventure that people need to meet, right? And you don't want to force them to meet that person, but it's just like, oh, and this happens. Right. Oh, and you're walking through and you run into this person. I do a lot of that, especially when I run open worlds. I mainly run open worlds because that's what players like to play. Even if it's a linear adventure, I can still make it into an open world. It's not the 3 doors going to the same place kind of nonsense. Just being a little more creative. And it takes way more prep time. I'll say that. Like I waste so much time prepping. Or not waste.
Right. Well, some amount of it because they don't go that way. So,
well, and that's the whole thing where you're just like, hey, I got this great 10 pages, rip, throw, done, right? Like it does never work that way. Well, I have to say that I'm pretty impressed with this adventure. Great balancing of the pillars, very well done, team. How did your personal path to D&D adventures begin at the same time?
So I've been DMing a long time and doing a lot of like ad lib DMing, like just by the seat of my pants. I've got always a ton of notes and never really written anything down like an adventure. So I didn't have a whole lot of confidence, but I talked to Alan Patrick, who used to run UConn, the Michigan convention here that has an AL room, and he used to handle that. So he was moving on to do other stuff. So he handed the reins over to me and Aaron Jones, who you'll see online a lot too. And then he mentioned that, someone should take his tradition of writing a CCC for UConn. And I took a year. I fretted and procrastinated and finally wrote it based on one of my friend's daughters that like fell in love with the goat from Elisande and the Blind Goat. Yeah, she rescued that goat over her dad. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something to entertain my friend and his daughters. And it did. It really worked for entertaining them. So I'm like, okay, maybe I can actually write this down. So we've been trying to do that every year. So we've got a yearly CCC that we've been doing. This year is kind of an exception because I haven't published this year's adventure in time. But so that will be either an adventure every year with either UConn or the PND, which is my personal server. One of those two every year, just because of that. I can put aside my personal imposter syndrome long enough to write something because obligation trumps imposter syndrome, I guess. So.
Shout out to Alan Patrick. I've run tons of his adventures before. Big shoes to fill at the same time. Congratulations. Looking out for you at the big shooter table next time around. That's awesome. And hi, Alan. If you ever want to be a guest on the show, please let me know. I'd love to have you here. A lot of respect for you. Being an experienced best-selling writer as yourself, what roadblocks have you overcome, and what advice could you give to other writers?
You're going to demonstrate that one with that sentence. Like my skin's crawling. Like, oh man, my imposter syndrome strong. I think a lot of authors have this. I still struggle with it because like I can write down a bunch of notes and I can entertain a bunch of people around a table. I don't have any lack of confidence about that. No, I take that back. I do occasionally, but like I'm pretty confident that I can entertain people with a set of notes. But trying to give it to another DM to run something I've written is hard. And then on top of that, it's like, what right do I have to call myself an author? There is that so and especially given that like when I started, like I didn't have an editor. I didn't have, anyone that could help me with proofreading. Um, I got lucky and I just ran into something at one of my tables where we had a player at one of the BMG games, the online games, Kamori, who you've seen her art. Many of you may have seen her art, but she was sketching individual scenes from my game, just posting into Discord, and it was like super fast. So I'm just much later. I'm like, would you like to do a cover for me? So now I had a cover, some notes, silly title, and I knew that a couple of my friends' daughters enjoyed it. So I'm like, okay, I can pull this off. So I had to live up to the cover, and my friends were asking about it. So it was enough to make me actually pull it off. And that continues to be the one adventure that sells consistently. I mean, I couldn't tell you why, but the Goat Mayor is a silly enough title. The cover is just really pretty. Um, and I have had people tell me how much they enjoy it, so it's good. And the other thing was the deadline. Oh my gosh, that Yukon deadline every year. It's like I missed it this year, and I feel horrible. But every previous year, I get to the point where you just have to finish, and you're like, this is a pile of garbage. I can't believe that I'm gonna like publish this. Um, and then afterwards, it's like, yeah, that's fine. It's like everything you looked at, people are kinder than you think. I'll say that and know that there's plenty of people that can prove me, like, with mean comments on the internet, but like the most people will tell you, like, you have a mistake here. You forgot to say how many enemies are in this room. Yep, I did. That was, I missed that, or this doesn't flow. DM's Guild allows you to go back and edit it. So that has been the deadline, and then the ability to fix has been able to help me, finish. So
Yeah, I know what you mean by the imposter syndrome.
mhm.
When I wrote my first adventure, my only adventure, it was very daunting because about halfway through you realize how much time you spent on it and how much time you have left that you have to play test, edit, especially if you're an army of one. It makes it
Yeah.
tough. And then you're putting yourself out there, like you're putting your own creative thoughts and your ideas out to your peers and your friends, and that takes a lot, of confidence to kind of do that. So I commend you and everybody else that ever takes a chance on writing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but you will never know until you try. And I think the best two
And
advices that I ever got was writing it in the style guide itself. Then you don't have to
mhm,
worry about fonts and where everything's supposed to go. I think that saved me a bazillion hours of time. And then the other thing
mhm,
that you kind of touched on is getting somebody else to playtest your adventure for you. I think
mhm,
that is a massive, massive step that every writer has to take. You don't realize all of the little oopses that you have in your adventure until somebody else reads it and goes, this doesn't make sense. Can you explain this to me? Can you explain this to me? And I think that's an important step that a lot of writers either don't have the support group to be able to do that, or just don't think of it at the same time. For me, the Dungeon Designers Guild, Dungeon Designers Discord, I think is what it's
yeah,
called now.
yep,
Amazing group of people that have helped me tremendously at the same time. So, publishing an adventure takes a team.
mhm.
Who is yours, and where did you go for support? I wonder.
Well, you mentioned the big one, like
Yeah.
this one. Oh, I had a couple of moments of severe neurosis. I don't know what to call it. I like had the crises in the middle of it, or just it wasn't going well. And Martine talked me from the ledge on that one. It was rough. I was really willing to step away from the project. I'm like, I don't want to disappoint anybody, but like it's going badly, and I don't think I can do it. And I'm irritating the cartographer because I don't have numbers, because I just say make it look good. So tell me the numbers. I'm irritating this person. And so, she talked me down from that. Brian was a huge help because like Brian's just very relaxed. So Brian Metz, the editor, and wrote a ton of stuff, but he just, well, fix it this way, fix it this way. And so I continue to talk to him all the time. He continues to be a good help for writing. And then just everyone there has always been a very supportive. I mean, like the goat mayor thing. I had the next problem was now that I've written one, how am I going to live up to it? And eventually, I just like with no support, I just like I can't and I won't, and I'm just going to publish this, and it is what it is. But like having them say, no, that's pretty good. I mean, it's like silly that it takes that external validation, but it does. There's just, I need to have someone look at something and say, okay, this is going pretty good or not. So I've been very grateful for their help. So
It's like the first time when you put a product out on DM's Guild and you sell a copy.
yeah, yeah.
I was
Well,
over the moon that someone bought a copy. Over the moon.
yeah.
Like,
Or your
my
first
first
positive review.
yeah, like somebody like just bought the adventure, and a couple of people have obviously since, and which is great, and it's not about the money at all. It's more
Yeah.
about the wow, someone is actually paying their own money for something I wrote, that I'm a published writer, and
Yeah.
the imposter syndrome of like I don't think of myself that way, but at the same time it's a great feeling when you put so much effort and put so much of your personal stake into something that other people are appreciating. So congratulations, like, good job. Okay, so Daniel, where does your writing path take you next? What's on the plate?
I finished these. I have a few installed adventures that are based on children's books that just are very silly. So like there is this children's book of there is a monster at the end of this book, and it struck me as being kind of an eldritch horror type concept. The don't read this book. There's a monster in the end of it, and so I wanted to mix Grover with H.P. Lovecraft. So it's silliness. I had a lot less Grover in it than I ended up when I was telling Brian about it. He was like, kept calling it the Grover Adventure. When are you going to finish the Grover Adventure? It's like, okay, so it is now the Grover Adventure. So I have a silly cover, and I've got the notes, and I've play tested a bunch of times. I just need to finish it. And then since then, of course, I've ended up with 2 sequels because I can't just finish one. I have to finish 3. So there's Monsters in Adventure, that is the Grover book. We have the Very Hungry Monster, of course, after the Very Hungry Caterpillar, and then Where the Wild Monsters Are, so
I was literally,
so
that was my next question was, oh my God, are you actually going to pull that one off? Amazing.
oh yeah, and it has a plot that is very not children's book, but the covers, they have the little gold book spine, they have the cartoony characters with speech bubbles. I actually spent more time on the covers than I probably have spent on writing so far, because it's fun to write covers that like pay homage to these children's books. But yeah,
When are you planning on releasing these?
well, I have to release them by the end of the year. So if it's
Sure
not by
enough.
the end of the year,
Okay,
I'm
so
bust.
hopefully we'll get some art for this so I can show all of you what
Oh
is
yeah,
anticipated, because like I'm very curious to say the least. Like those are some of my favorite books as a kid, so
yeah.
that's gonna creep the shit out of me. That's great.
Um,
So that's awesome.
yeah.
Any other folks that you'd love to give a shout out to or thank for your journey along the way?
I got a ton of credit going to the dungeon designers. I mentioned them earlier. So Brian is still, I keep saying his name, but he's been a big help. I definitely plug his adventures because he's got a really good a good eye for silly fun and good combat. So he still continues to help me balance my combats or give me ideas for, oh, maybe we can twist it this way. And then of course the rest of the Ad Astra team, like Jason's got this grand vision that continues to work. And we're starting to work on it. I don't know when they're going to announce it, but I look for other projects for coming from the Dungeon Designers Discord in the future, because I'm
Ooh.
I'm waiting to see when they announce it or what they're going to say. But
Yeah.
yeah, don't expect us to stay idle. So
No, it's you have a really good team going there that it's really interesting. The adventures are all over the place. Everyone has a different genre. I'm really enjoying them, and that's why we're running the series here. I'm only looking forward to seeing what kind of creativity comes out of you guys next. It's get awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Daniel. Amazing job on the adventure and the rest of the team. I'm looking forward to running it for sure. What could possibly go wrong? And that's going to wrap up our Q&A chat. This is the Dungeon Master Academy, Mastering the Realms. I'm Dungeon Master Jeff. Peace out.